With offices in Radford and Blacksburg, Patrick K. Moore is a client-focused, community-involved law firm committed to you. If a legal issue touches your family, finances, or future, we can help. Whether it's real estate, business law, or estate planning, Patrick Moore welcomes the opportunity to speak with you about your legal issues.
Hi everyone, I'm Rose Martin, and we are right around the corner at the beautiful Settlers Museum in this barn with none other than Jim Minick. Now, Jim Minick is the author of 5 books, including The Blueberry Years, award-winning book for nonfiction, and it's going to be the one we're talking about today, The Fire Is Your Water. This book is a love story, a little compassion, a little heartache, when Ada Franklin, who's a young powwow doctor, she can heal wounds, she can heal warts, she can take the fire out. But that all changes one day in June of 1953. We'll talk about that in a minute. Hi, Jim. Welcome to Right Around the Corner.
It's good to be here, Rose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on the success of all 5 books, from The Blueberry Years to your debut novel.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a
And what
great
transitioned you to a debut novel?
The novel's built on a bunch of family stories, and I was trying for several years to make it a nonfiction book, and then and that wasn't working because the stories cover 30 years and 4 generations, and so I realized that if I changed the focus and sharpened the focus, that's one of the problems I was having with the nonfiction. I couldn't figure out how to bring them all together. But when I started to think about fiction, I started to think about faith and the struggles of faith and how fire plays into all of that. Then I realized I had a story. So it took a long time, but it was finally good to have that.
How long of a time?
Over 10 years.
To get all the pieces together?
Yeah. And I was working full time and writing other books in that time period. But yeah, it was. I mean, I had to learn a lot about fiction. You know, I had to study up on how to write fiction.
And this isn't the first time you've used the family stories or that personal story to write, is it? Because in Blueberry Years, that's your story.
Right. Yeah, The Blueberry Years is a memoir. Yeah, about a young couple chasing a crazy blueberry dream. So. And
as a child, you're with your grandparents growing up on a blueberry farm?
I grew up beside my grandparents, and yeah, they had a blueberry farm. My grandfather planted in the 1950s. It was very small, but it supplemented the dairy. And yeah, so I remember picking too many berries, you know, making myself sick on berries and mowing around the bushes, but that was about all I knew about blueberries until we started our own.
And what was that like to start from scratch and decide,
It was crazy.
Yeah.
And my wife at the time, you know, we were both pretty young, and she didn't know how little I knew, so it was kind of funny to have her realize along the way that I didn't know what I was doing. So we learned a lot. Plus, we were doing it organically, which one of our neighbors, who was a great friend, and he grew pick your own strawberries, but he used any chemical that was there. And so he called our organic fertilizers holy powders, and he had a lot of fun teasing us. But he finally came around when he realized we had a good crop. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to compare notes with him.
So growing up near your grandparents' farm, the outdoors is always really special to you. So this setting of being here in a barn will, it's kind of like home, but it'll be even more precise when we get starting talking about Fire Is Your Water.
Right.
Because that's seen with the barn. So take me back a few years to Jim Minick growing up and learning to be a writer and wanting to kind of explore the outdoors and finding that niche.
So I grew up in this very small town of 300 people in south central Pennsylvania, and my parents both were school teachers, and our family farm where my dad was raised was just a quarter mile away. So every day after school I would go help milk the cows, but I also got great teaching and nurturing from so many teachers, and you know, I learned to play with words early on, and learned the value of getting outside early on. So I'm thrilled to be able to nurture both of those, and be nurtured by them.
And I think I read somewhere that you still walk every morning in the woods, and the woods is a very special, almost a spiritual place for you to connect.
Yes. Yeah.
And still today, you still
Try
make sure to do that.
Yep. Yep. It's a little different nowadays. We have a lot of bears, so and I'm not afraid of the bears, but I'm afraid of one of our dogs having an encounter with a bear. So we make a lot of noise when we go on walks this time of year. So, but it's still very much a peaceful and enjoyable. I enjoy the quiet when I'm not making noise, and the bears aren't around. But yeah, it's a great place. It's a sanctuary. Yeah.
Well, and nature is just, I think it refuels us in a way, doesn't it? It
sure.
re-energizes us and kind of fills that vessel.
Yep.
When you think about your early school years, I read that one of your first public presentations of a poem was about your 6th grade teacher.
Yep. I was wondering if you're going to bring that up. I wrote a lot, but I don't remember really any public presentations or any publications until 6th grade. And our teacher was named Mrs. Haller, and she was very pretty, and we all were in love with her. And so I wrote a poem called Hot Lips Haller. And I don't remember how she found it, but she made me read it aloud in class, and I don't know who was more embarrassed. I think she was embarrassed as much as I was. I mean, it wasn't scandalous or anything, but it was fun. It rhymed. It was probably horrible, and but we're still friends.
Oh, are you? That's great.
She's come to some of my readings back at home. So yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Were your parents avid readers or writers? Where did that
they were avid
internal spark
readers.
come from?
Yeah, they read a lot. My dad taught math, and my mom taught kindergarten, so they didn't write a lot, but they were avid readers, and my sister was too. My older sister kind of taught me how to read, and so that was always there. Yeah. Same with my grandparents. They liked to read. So. And
I read that in Fire Is Your Water, based on your grandma, who actually was a powwow healer. And I had no idea, neither did Carol, what that ever meant. And I thought I had been familiar with some of the Pennsylvania Dutch and familiar with some of the Southwest Virginia, Native American, other Native American medicine, but I had never heard the term before.
And I don't know if the terms transpired or come down the mountains, but much of the folk healing has. So it was my great-grandmother. Her name was Ida Franklin Minnick, and she, like you said in the intro, she could take warts off, but she also could stop blood if you had a cut, and she could take the fire out of a burn. And so, and I remember her, she lived until I was 4, so I remember her a little bit. But I collected all these family stories about her. And the word powwowing, we should maybe talk about some of those stories in a moment, but the word powwowing has nothing to do with Native Americans. I think the Pennsylvania Dutch just stole that word. But it is all about faith healing. And so all these chants are very much based on belief and religion, knowledge of the Bible. They're often pulling in the Holy Spirit as well as Scripture. And I would imagine, or I know much of those traditions travel down the Appalachian chain and are in this area. So when I give readings, especially in this area, I ask people if they have stories of healing, and I usually get 1 or 2. So it's been fun to hear that. Yeah.
Well, Carol had her own personal story, our co-producer Carol. So when she's reading the book, she's remembering having a neighbor and having the healing done for her. So
wow.
It really brought it home. I'd love to hear some of those stories about your great-grandma.
The one of the most fascinating is, and I make this fit, but I use it in the book. Clyde McGee was a close family friend, and he lived about 4 miles away on the other side of Newburgh, and he was a dairy farmer as well. And he called up Ida. This was probably in the 1940s or 50s, and Ida never drove. She never had a license. So she called up Ida one day and said that his favorite cow had stepped on her teat, and he couldn't get it to stop bleeding. And he needed her to come tell to chant over this cow. And Ida said she couldn't because nobody was there to drive her. And Clyde said, well, I don't care, just say it now. And so she did, and it worked.
Over the phone?
Over the phone, distance of 4 miles on a cow.
Wow.
So, you know, that's a family tradition, a family story, been in the oral tradition. But I believe it, you know, but it's who knows how and why it worked.
Well, and she wrote something for you, didn't she, when you were a baby or before you were born, a chant and a prayer for you that your dad carried around?
Right. So I had severe earaches when I was a kid, and she wrote a chant to take the pain away from that, and my dad carried it around in his wallet, and I don't know if it worked or not. I don't, you know, I have great ears now, so. But yeah, there's several chants. Usually the chants were, in the tradition, were usually handed down. They were always handed down man to woman, woman to man. And usually they were kept secret and given orally. But for some reason, Ida wrote several of them down. So we have maybe 3, which has been kind of fascinating to read and share.
What were some of the others for?
One was for taking out fire, and it's this long, really, really long chant that draws on the power of Jesus and the power of Mary and the power of the Holy Spirit. And you know, it's in my great grandmother, I think, only had a limited education, probably 8th grade at most, and she always misspelled holy. She gave it 2 L's, so it was Holly. So it's always very distinctive to see her handwriting as well as her misspellings.
Well, and even to have those in her own hand, that's pretty special.
Yeah.
So has it carried on through your family?
Not really. I think she taught one of my uncles a little bit, but he never really practiced. He practiced it on himself, he said, some. But no, it's not. But I did go to a German Folklife Festival last summer in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, and I met a couple people. I kind of thought it was fading out, but I met a folklorist there who said it's very much alive in that, especially in that area. So
people are still seeking those who have that gift to take the fire out or to remove the warts. And is there any limit to what it would be able to perhaps heal for the warts, or taking the fire out, or healing the cow?
Limit of faith.
Yeah.
And you know, it doesn't always work, and it's very much based on belief. But so another family story that I do use in the book is that a rich family came to visit my great grandmother with their daughter, and it's never really clear in the oral tradition what her sickness was, but they asked, but it sounded like epilepsy, and so they asked her to heal this daughter, and my great grandmother said she had never done that, but she studied her books and did a chant, and it worked. So I was able to use that in the book.
And what I remember reading about that was that she wouldn't take money. So for some reason she felt that that was a gift from God that she wasn't going to charge for. Right. That she was almost that conduit to the healing.
Yes, and that's pretty common. There's some powwow doctors who do take money, but most don't. And it's very much a my great grandmother believed that if she took the money, it would cancel the healing. So.
Or prevent her from maybe healing anymore, right?
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because when I was reading about the faith healing and reading about the powwows and trying to look at the powwow healing doctors, in your book, you know, she's 20 years old, and she's just a really young girl. Yeah. To be able to do something like this or know, and the townsfolk all happen to know too, and I'm sure that might be similar to your grandmother. People in town all knew and would come to her for help and want that. Do you have any stories that your parents would share with you about that, people just showing up at your house?
No, not specifically about my great grandmother, but I mean I read that in other powwow healers, and it was very much a gift economy. You know, the gift was given to the healer, so they felt obligated to keep that gift going. Yeah.
Well, and I love the way you wove the truth of your family story into a fictional setting in the book. And taking all of those stories and all of those notes from decades and trying to, put them into one novel seems like that really had to be challenging. When you begin to write, is it true you write standing up?
Yes.
It is true. Okay.
Yeah.
How come?
It's healthier.
Okay. So at a podium or at a standing table? Or?
I do have a podium for at a different place, but usually it's at it's called a Thoreau desk because it's based on what Thoreau used, but it's a big, kind of like a drafting table, so good size, and you put your laptop there, and yeah.
And Thoreau is one of your early influences, right?
Yeah.
Do you have a certain format? Do you? I read that you love to write in the mornings.
Right.
Morning seems to be quiet and inspirational for you.
Right.
And word count per day? Do you let it flow? Do you edit along the way? How does that work?
It depends on the project. For the novel, I was wanting a good day when I wasn't teaching was 1,000 words a day. But that's changed significantly with the current project, which is much more difficult, and it's not my own story so much as somebody else's. So I'm trying for 500 words a day. So.
And how do you handle the editing process? Along the way, at the end, what works for you?
Along the way, pretty much, which is not probably good, but I love revising. That's probably my favorite part of the whole process. So once the hard part's getting it out, and once I plow through, then it's fun to go back and figure it out. So.
Well, I'm excited to chat about Fire is Your Water with these three main characters. We've got Ada, we've got Will, and Cicero, which caught me totally off guard. So let's start with Ada, based on your great-grandma.
Right.
And her name was Ida, that's Ada. She's 20 years old.
Right.
And let's meet her.
So her identity is this healer, and she in the community, that's who she's known. But she's also struggles with love. She's still married. She's still unmarried and living at home. And the novel opens with the family barn burning,
which is why we're here. What a perfect setting, right?
Yes, just don't don't ignite. But that also happened.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Yeah, the family barn burned in the 1950s, and there were two women at home, and it was my great-grandmother and my grandmother, and they went in and saved the cows and other animals. So I had that story, and then in the fire. This did not happen, I don't think, to my great-grandmother, but in that fire, the fictional character suddenly faces death and doesn't, or is faced with death and fire and the unknown, and she suddenly is afraid. And that fear is what changes her in the fire, and she loses her ability to heal. And so that, once I realized the question of how does a healer find healing or heal herself, or how does a community heal a healer, once I had that question, I realized I had a novel, and that is her journey. She
That's a big question. How does a healer heal themselves, or a community heal, when we probably all in some way, right? We help others, then how do you help yourself? So you've got a larger question for all of us to really think about in there.
Yep. And when I realized that was kind of the gist of her journey, I was like, I have something. So I realized then it was a novel. So.
And introduce us to Will.
Okay, so the two characters live on the opposite side of the mountain, and they never meet until they're in their 20s, and they both work at the Pennsylvania Turnpike Service Plaza, Blue Mountain Service Plaza. And Ada waits tables in the Howard Johnson's, Hojo's, and Will pumps gas out on the Esso station.
And you know what made me think about that? Carol and I were talking about this. How many young readers would even know that Hojo stood for Howard Johnson's,
Right.
or that gas stations used to be full service.
Right.
That you just drove up and sat in your car.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and so that love. Well, so Will sees her and finally builds up the courage to go in, and she's dipping ice cream, and she hands him a scoop or hands him a cone, and winks, and that is kind of the opening to, for both of them. And she's ashamed and kind of surprised that she winked, and he's floored, and so they fall in love, and that love story is my parents' love story. So it was kind of fun to be able to incorporate that. So he is very much, he's an orphan. His mother died at his birth, and so where Ada has all kinds of faith and belief, he has all kinds of not faith. He's very much an agnostic and doesn't believe in a lot of things, but he does believe in birds. And
Intro Cicero.
Yeah, so he loves birds. They're kind of his escape, and he, during some of his first days working on the turnpike, he notices a raven nest, or what he thinks where a nest is, way up high on the mountain. And he goes and finds it one day, and then the next night there's a big storm, and he worries about him, and so he races back. He lives on the other side of the mountain, so he has to go through the double tunnels. And when he finally climbs up the mountain, he can't find the nest. But he does find one of the adult birds, very much wounded and with a broken wing, and the bird's trapped. So to release the bird, he has to cut the foot off. And so the healing is so I have a triangle of characters. They're all wounded in different ways. And I didn't realize this until going in, maybe halfway through. I didn't realize Cicero was going to be a character until halfway through, but I have the perfect lover's triangle.
You do, and you also, the way you aligned all the chapters, having Cicero have separate chapters, giving that separate voice and perspective throughout the story, we found really interesting too. Would you be willing to read for us?
Sure.
And set it up. What did you choose?
So I should say that most of the book is written in the third person point of view, limited third person. It's alternating between Ada and Will. But occasionally there are chapters in Cicero's perspective with his voice. And as one reviewer called it, their first bird point of view. And so they're his perspective on life. And so this is his meditation on a feather. And he is, like I said, he was injured and he couldn't fly. And Will has worked with him to build back his strength. And he's about ready to fly again. But he still hasn't flown in a couple weeks. So this is Cicero on feathers, and he has a broken wing. Think about it. A feather is such a simple thing, all lightness and what looks like frill, all of it attached to a hollow bone. If you hold it to the light, you can almost see through that bone. Hard to believe what a feather can do. And don't you forget what a feather used to do. It wrote your words, lots of them, letters spilling over pages, all of it for you, you thankless crooks. Your forefathers plucked it from some hapless goose and called it a quill. Then they used it to write your Declaration of Independence. Yet there they were, dependent on a lowly feather to sign all their names. Poor goose, where's her name? But enough of that. When I preen, I run my bill over each dibble and nub, each separate flange. I can feel the pockets of possibility, the way they all knit together to form one dark strand. And I realize that a feather is a flame with spine and ribs. Or maybe a feather, a black one anyway, is a ghost of a flame, like you're sitting around a campfire at night, staring at that space between each flicker. There a flicker disappears, and that space of emptiness becomes a black feather full of stars. So a feather is just a spark to ignite the air. My God of all wrinkled mountains, I can't wait to fly again.
So nice, and there's so much more to the story. And your book is also has a separate little clue if people happen to get the hardback cover and
Right.
take it off and see something really interesting that I didn't even understand until the end of the book. And I'm most glad I didn't know about it until after I read it. And the same thing that Carol and I were saying, the same thing. And it's a revelation of, oh my gosh, that is clever. And how creative is that?
So a word I learned in the researching this is the verb to raven. And so I want to pass that on to your audience. To raven means to take or to hunger. And we think of it often with the word ravenous. So to raven is what Cicero does a lot. And on the cover, he is taking the O out of the your. And then if you open the cover, the O disappears. And then on the back, you see that Cicero is flying away with it. So, yeah, I had nothing to do with that. The book publisher and designer did, and I was thrilled when they finally told me to look. And
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, this has been wonderful, Jim.
Sure.
It's gone by way too quickly, and there's so many more things I'd like to chat with you about. But I'd like to thank you, obviously thank Jim Minick for sharing Fire is Your Water, the Blueberry Years, the stories that really are the fabric of his life with all of us. Special thanks to our friends at the Settlers Museum of Southwest Virginia, located in beautiful Smith County. What a great setting for this interview. You know, Fire is Your Water is a little bit magical realism, a story of love and faith and community with lots of twists and turns. To find out more about the book and more of our conversation with Jim, check it out online. Thanks so much for joining us, and tell your friends all about us. I'm Rose Martin, and I'll see you next time right around the corner.